Imagine a colossal steel monster, capable of disappearing without a trace from radar screens, appearing to be nothing more than a harmless fishing trawler. Yet, hidden within its depths were missiles and artillery powerful enough to wipe cities off the map. The United States invested billions of dollars into this project, hailing it as the next generation of warfare, a nightmare for any potential adversary. But what began as the pinnacle of engineering soon turned into a series of scandals, failures, and frankly, a massive joke. This is the story of the USS Zumwalt, the most expensive and the most unusual destroyer of the modern era. This stealth warship proved so complex and costly to produce that the U.S. Navy could ultimately afford to build only 3 units. The idea for a universal combat ship originated back in the 1990s. U.S. military strategists believed the future of the fleet lay in a single platform, capable of replacing an entire line of vessels, from mighty battleships to missile cruisers. The new design was meant to be a fearsome weapon, surpassing anything that had ever sailed the seas. Initial plans called for over 30 such destroyers, each costing more than an entire squadron of conventional ships. In the halls of the Pentagon, they confidently envisioned a future where Zumwalt formations held nearly half the planet under surveillance. However, reality proved much harsher. The program ran into unbelievable difficulties. The budget soared exponentially, technologies constantly needed refinement, and the cost of the vessel increased year after year. The American Congress, losing patience, steadily slashed the project's scale. From 32 planned ships, the program was first cut to 7, and then to just 3. Nevertheless, before it became obvious that the series was doomed, the first Zumwalt rolled off the assembly line. Its futuristic appearance stunned the world. A long, knife-like bow and an unusual, inward-sloping hull, a design meant to cut through waves and minimize radar visibility. In the sea haze, this 16,000-ton behemoth truly looked like a small vessel. It was unprecedented in the history of naval shipbuilding. But this is exactly where the deep-seated problems, which few suspected at the time, began to surface. In the latter half of the 1990s, the Pentagon was riding a wave of absolute superiority. The Cold War was over, the Soviet Union had collapsed, and Americans felt entitled to dictate global terms. Yet, military analysts understood that to maintain absolute dominance, the U.S. Navy needed more than just another ship. It required a true technological leap. Thus was born the concept of a new generation destroyer, a universal war machine. It was designed to hunt submarines, shoot down aircraft, destroy surface targets, and provide massive fire support to ground troops using its superguns. In the eyes of American admirals, this ship represented the perfect hybrid, somewhere between a cruiser, a battleship, and a destroyer, capable of replacing several classes of combat units at once. On paper, the project looked brilliant, a futuristic, angular design, minimal radar signature, massive guns, and universal missile launchers. All of this was supposed to make the vessel an unbeatable combat platform. Moreover, developers promised the new destroyer would be twice as effective as previous generations, while the crew size would be drastically reduced thanks to unprecedented automation. It seemed the United States was on the verge of a technological revolution. The project received massive support in Congress. Funding was generous, as the goal was to build 32 ships, an entire new fleet of the future. Leading corporations were involved, each vying for a piece of the colossal budget. The project steadily grew to unimaginable scales, but with the ambition came the problems. The more innovative ideas emerged, the more complex and expensive the ship became. Initially, the cost of each destroyer was estimated at $1.5 billion, but it soon exceeded $4 billion. Congressmen began to question, was this experimental toy worth such money when the same funds could build dozens of proven Arleigh Burke-class destroyers? In the early 2000s, the project was saved from cancellation only through a massive redesign and renaming. The ship was named Zumwalt after the admiral who once reformed the American fleet. But even then, it was clear that out of the 32 planned units, at best, only a handful would ever be built. Nevertheless, the Americans refused to back down. In their eyes, the Zumwalt had to become the defining symbol of the future Navy. The construction of the first ship became an epic undertaking. Dozens of major corporations and hundreds of contractors across various states were involved. The hull was laid at Bath Iron Works in Maine, electronics were supplied by Raytheon, the power plant by Rolls-Royce, and the artillery systems were developed by BAE Systems. It was an intricate technological puzzle, consisting of thousands of parts and systems that had to be integrated into a single hull. In 2011, after years of preparation, the first ship was officially laid down. High-ranking military officials and politicians gathered at the shipyard, confident that a new era in U.S. Navy history was beginning. But difficulties arose from the very first months. The ship was designed with a completely new Tumblehome scheme, where the sides slope inward toward the top. This created an unusual silhouette and significantly reduced the radar cross-section. However, engineers discovered that this hull shape behaved unpredictably in high waves. Solutions had to be found to strengthen the structure so the vessel wouldn't lose stability in the open ocean. Added to this were endless delays in supplying the cutting-edge electronics. The control systems, combat suites, and the so-called total ship computing environment were practically built from scratch. Americans dreamed that all ship processes would be controlled by a unified computer network, where any terminal could manage everything from navigation to missile launches. In practice, this led to constant failures and rework. By 2013, the ship finally left the dockyard. Its appearance was stunning. The 600-foot steel giant, with its sleek shapes, sharp bow, and minimal superstructure, looked like a futuristic cruiser straight out of science fiction. Few could believe that this was a full-fledged warship, not just a prototype. The first sea trial was a crucial test. The Zumwalt headed into the Atlantic to test its performance in real conditions. For the press and the public, it was a triumph. Photos of the new destroyer flooded the newspapers. Its appearance was so unusual that journalists compared it to everything from an alien craft to a giant blade slicing through the waves. But behind the facade of beautiful photographs lay a complex reality. The ship required continuous refinement. None of the key systems had yet been perfected, and engineers worked around the clock, fixing flaws. When the USS Zumwalt headed into the ocean for full sea trials in early 2014, the attention of the entire military world was fixed on it. This was the moment of truth. Was this truly an engineering marvel, or just an expensive toy incapable of justifying billions in investment? The first thing that struck the testers was the silence. The massive 16,000-ton ship, the largest destroyer in U.S. history, moved almost noiselessly. The electric power plant made it so quiet that from a distance, the giant hull seemed merely to glide across the water. For enemy submarines, this presented a serious problem. Detecting such a ship became exponentially harder. But the most astonishing thing happened on radar screens. When the Zumwalt headed out to sea, its radar signature looked not like a giant warship, but like a small fishing trawler. Officers observing this effect couldn't believe their eyes. Its entire strange form, the Tumblehome hull, the sharp bow, the sloping superstructure, worked exactly as intended. They were looking at the most invisible ship in the world, a true stealth giant. However, the trials quickly revealed the downside. In high waves, the unusual hull shape was not as stable as expected. When the ocean threw huge swells at the destroyer, its bow dug into the water, and the deck was constantly awash with spray. Command tried to reassure the press that this wasn't critical, but the sailors knew the ship had a weakness. The new artillery systems also raised questions. Two massive 155mm guns, hidden in futuristic sealed turrets, looked like weapons from a sci-fi movie. They were designed to fire special guided projectiles flying over 60 miles, hitting targets with surgical precision. But testing revealed that firing in strong winds and heavy seas required constant adjustments. Moreover, each shot cost the budget almost as much as launching a cruise missile. Nevertheless, in the early months, The Americans tried to show the world only the ship's brilliant side. Shows were arranged for reporters where the Zumwalt turned almost in place thanks to its powerful electric motors, or demonstrated helicopter and drone takeoff from its massive deck. Admirals smiled and declared that this was the ship of the future that would change naval warfare. One of the most striking moments occurred when the destroyer was sent to an area with heavy shipping, where dozens of commercial vessels were operating. Ordinary captains had no idea a military giant was sailing alongside them. On their radars, it looked like a small launch. This was a true victory for the engineers, but also a troubling sign. A ship capable of disappearing from screens was virtually invisible, even to allies. Trials continued for months. Speed was tested. The Zumwalt comfortably maintained 30 knots. Electronics were tested. Thousands of sensors and screens flickered, creating the image of a fully digital ship where every function was computer-controlled. But the more systems were checked, the more minor glitches were found, requiring time and money to fix. Still, by the end of 2016, the ship was officially commissioned into the fleet and sent to San Diego. To the press and the public, it looked like a triumph. America had the most expensive and most futuristic ship in its history. But for military engineers, it was only the beginning of a cascade of problems. Inside the Zumwalt lay what Americans proudly called the technical marvel of the 21st century. Every inch of the ship was packed with electronics designed to turn it into a true combat platform of the future. Unlike older destroyers, where dozens of systems functioned separately, here everything was unified into a single network, the total ship computing environment. This meant any terminal on board could control everything, from missile launchers and artillery to navigation systems, and even climate control in the cabins. The power plant was particularly impressive. The Zumwalt was an all-electric vessel. Its two Rolls-Royce gas turbines and generators produced nearly 80 megawatts of power, comparable to the energy produced by nuclear aircraft carriers. This reserve allowed designers to promise that, in the future, the Zumwalt could be equipped with any advanced system, from laser cannons to railguns. The artillery systems were another source of naval pride. Two massive 155mm gun turrets were concealed beneath futuristic housings, hiding their power. These guns were designed to fire guided projectiles that flew over 60 miles, hitting targets with pinpoint accuracy. This combination of capabilities, along with vertical launch systems capable of holding various missile types, from anti-ship to anti-air, turned a vessel into a versatile war machine. The destroyer's functionality was further enhanced by a massive flight deck, designed to simultaneously accommodate 2 helicopters or multiple drones, significantly increasing its operational range. To counter underwater threats, the Zumwalt was equipped with cutting-edge sonar and integrated anti-submarine warfare systems. The ship's hull was designed to maximize noise absorption and minimize thermal radiation. Even the exhaust gases passed through special coolers, drastically reducing the vessel's infrared signature. When the ship's control center was first shown to journalists, it looked more like a spaceship's bridge than a destroyer. Rows of monitors, touch panels, and operator chairs resembled a scene from a science fiction movie. Command proudly boasted that the Zumwalt could be managed by a crew of only 158 sailors, while its predecessors required almost twice that number. On paper, this ship seemed the ideal weapon: fast, silent, invisible, and armed to the teeth. Journalists wrote that the Zumwalt could simultaneously fight against aircraft, submarines, and surface targets, and, if necessary, level coastal cities with precise artillery strikes. This is how the United States positioned it to the world, as a formidable giant ahead of its time. However, within the Navy, a growing realization was setting in. The so-called miracle had too many weaknesses. The price tag of the Zumwalt program became its main curse. When Pentagon officials launched the project in the late 90s, they assured Congress that the cost of a single ship would not exceed $1.5 billion. Those figures seemed realistic, as new technology is always expensive. But no one anticipated how quickly the budget would explode. By the mid-2000s, it became clear that the estimates were out of control. Every new element and every modification added to the cost, and instead of $1.5 billion, the price of a single ship exceeded $4 billion. When factoring in research and development costs, the first three destroyers cost $22 billion. This sum could have built an entire fleet of proven Arleigh Burke-class ships. The U.S. Congress openly voiced outrage. Some senators called the program a black hole, while others proposed shutting it down completely to stop hemorrhaging the budget on an experimental toy. However, the military held firm. They argued it was the ship of the future, and abandoning it would mean admitting defeat. A compromise was eventually reached. From the 32 ships initially planned, the number was first cut to 7, and then to just 3. Even this reduced series became the most expensive in naval history. For comparison, a single Arleigh Burke cost half the price, but utilized reliable systems proven by decades of service. Admirals understood that in a real conflict, they would likely send a dozen Arleigh Burkes into battle rather than one Zumwalt with questionable prospects. Yet, the money continued to flow. The program to develop artillery shells for the Zumwalt alone became a financial scandal. The cutting-edge guided munitions were initially supposed to cost $35,000 each, but the price eventually skyrocketed to almost $800,000. For comparison, that money could buy a cruise missile with 10 times the range. Congress couldn't bear it and ordered the production of the shells halted, leaving the ship with guns it simply couldn't load. Hidden costs piled up. Every electronic glitch required rework. Every sea sortie incurred additional repair and maintenance expenses. Even spare parts had to be ordered from exclusive manufacturers, multiplying the price. As a result, the Zumwalt earned the dubious reputation of being the most expensive and most problematic destroyer in U.S. history. Newspapers began writing that the ship, designed to symbolize the future, had become a symbol of senseless budget waste. But the military continued to stand by their project, claiming these 3 destroyers would serve as a unique platform for testing the latest technologies. When the initial trials concluded and the Zumwalt officially entered the fleet, it became clear that behind the impressive exterior lay serious difficulties. The most expensive destroyer of the modern era turned out to be, essentially, a floating laboratory where every system required endless adjustments. Incidents soon began to show that the ideal ship of the future was not yet ready for real war. One of the first setbacks involved the power plant. 80 megawatts of power should have given the Zumwalt incredible autonomy and flexibility. But the reality was different. In 2016, just weeks after commissioning, the destroyer suddenly lost propulsion while transiting the Panama Canal. The $4 billion state-of-the-art ship sat helplessly dead in the water, requiring a tow through the canal, under the eyes of tourists and the press. For the U.S. Navy, it was a public humiliation. Problems also lurked in the realm of electronics. The unified computer network, conceived as the ship's heart, often worked erratically. The failure of one module could paralyze several subsystems at once. Officers informally admitted they sometimes had to reboot entire network segments, as if they were dealing with a frozen home computer rather than a combat vessel. For a fleet counting on absolute reliability in battle, this was extremely alarming. But the main blow came from the artillery systems. The 255mm superguns were initially presented as the ship's pride. During trials, impressive results were achieved. The shells reliably hit their targets. But it soon emerged that each round cost nearly $800,000. The production of the shells was canceled, rendering the Zumwalt's cannons useless ballast. The ship was left with 2 giant guns and no ammunition. The situation was exacerbated by minor breakdowns. The gas cooling system would malfunction, increasing the ship's infrared signature, or problems would arise with opening the vertical launch system covers. Finally, serious doubts emerged about the reduced crew concept. Instead of 300 sailors, like on the Arleigh Burke class, the Zumwalt operated with only about 150. While automation was meant to compensate, practice showed that in battle, during a fire, flooding, or serious accident, such a small crew simply could not cope. Officers informally admitted the ship was beautiful and unique, but too vulnerable for real combat. Every new sea deployment brought fresh scandals. Journalists wrote about the ghost ship that cost more than an aircraft carrier but couldn't perform its basic tasks. The crew size issue was particularly critical. The original design called for only 95 sailors. After the ship was launched, it became clear that reality was far from the glossy presentations. The crew was eventually increased to 158 sailors plus a 28-person air detachment. While this sounded like a technological victory, in real combat, human hands are irreplaceable. The Arleigh Burkes always had dedicated damage control teams. The Zumwalt had no such reserve. The reputation continued to suffer. Following the Panama Canal incident, the second ship in the series, the Michael Monsieur, suddenly lost power during sea trials in 2017. The third destroyer, the Lyndon B. Johnson, was immediately designated as cut down, with some expensive systems removed to reduce costs. Journalists and sailors began to joke. The Zumwalt was beautiful in photos, but useless in a fight. In the hallways of the Navy, officers called it a floating laboratory for testing new technologies, not a war-winning weapon. The radar, originally conceived as an ultra-powerful target detection tool, was downgraded to save $80 million per ship. Consequently, its air defense capabilities were inferior to older destroyers. This meant the Zumwalt itself needed protection when under attack, despite initially being designed to lead a battle group. But perhaps the most painful failure for the fleet was the ship's lack of a clear mission. It was too expensive to use as a regular destroyer. Its guns were useless without shells. Its radar lagged behind older ships, and its small crew made it highly vulnerable to serious damage. Admirals realized they had acquired 3 ships that cost as much as aircraft carriers but would bring far less utility in battle. Despite all the setbacks, the program could not be canceled. Too much funding and political capital had been invested. A strategic decision was made. If the ship couldn't perform its original mission, it must find a new role. The frantic search for a new purpose began. Scrapping a ship into which $22 billion had been invested was politically impossible. First, transformation into an artillery support vessel was considered, but without ammunition, the powerful guns were dead weight. The next idea was to turn them into anti-ship hunters focused entirely on surface targets. But this would sacrifice air and submarine defense capabilities, making the Zumwalt too specialized. For a giant that cost as much as a carrier, such a limited role was unconvincing. Then came a revolutionary opportunity. Hypersonic weapons. The United States was actively developing hypersonic missiles, capable of flying faster than Mach 5 and penetrating any existing air defense system. The idea was to make the Zumwalts the first ships in the fleet equipped with this groundbreaking weapon. The logic was simple. If these 3 giants were experimental platforms, let them become the testing ground for the most advanced weaponry of the future. In 2021, it was officially announced. The Zumwalt-class ships would become the first carriers of naval hypersonic missiles. All work to install the launch systems and integrate the new weaponry is planned to be completed by 2025. This was tantamount to breathing new life into a project many had written off as a catastrophic failure. If the hypersonic missiles live up to expectations, the Zumwalts will become the key strike force for the United States on the world's oceans. Their stealth, powerful energy plant, and ability to carry cutting-edge systems make them ideal platforms for a weapon no one else currently possesses. The destroyers that started as universal killers are being transformed into experimental, floating laboratories for the hypersonic future. The journey to turn these stealth giants into operational platforms is urgent. The 2 useless 155mm cannons, once the pride of the fleet, are being removed to make way for new silos for the hypersonic missiles. These missiles will strike targets thousands of miles away, moving at speeds that no modern anti-missile defense system can evade. The lead ship, the Zumwalt, is currently undergoing massive modernization. It has been taken out of San Diego and sent to the shipyard in Portland, where it will essentially be rebuilt over several years. The United States promises that by 2025, at least one of these ships will sail with installed hypersonic missiles. This is the last attempt to prove that those billions were not spent in vain. As engineers install the new silos and sailors await the moment to go to sea with updated armament, the main question remains: will these three giants finally justify the hopes placed in them and become a true nightmare for adversaries? Or will they forever remain a symbol of the most expensive and controversial experiments in naval history? The answer to that question will be known very soon.